You know what was so funny, man? Was like as I'm like reconnecting with you and the content and watching some YouTube videos and stuff. Like there's a video, I can't remember what platform. I mean, it was on YouTube, but I can't remember what publication had done it. And it was brilliant. I think it was you and one of your sous chefs, and I think you might have been doing dumplings or you were rolling dough or you were laminating dough or something like that. And I always just love to look at the comments because the internet just is hilarious and it never fails. But it was so funny because there's so many people that were like, I just ate there. Andrew and the team are brilliant, or look at the attention to detail. But then there was a couple people who were like requirements for working in Andrew's kitchen: expert culinary skills and being jacked AF. Or like one person was like, both these guys are absolute units. Like it was
I moan about our head chef all the time. I'm like, standing next to you is like standing next to a fridge freezer. No, I literally, there's no space to move when he's plonked there.
it was so funny. And then another person was like, these dudes hit the food and hit the gym. Mad respect.
Yeah, I remember. And yeah, it's like you can't get employed here unless you can bench 150 or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Did that just happen that way? Or how did, I mean, was that your executive chef or your sous chef? I mean,
That's my
he's
head
just
chef.
absolutely stacked.
Yeah. You know what it is? He's been with me for nearly 15 years. So when he started with us, he was a young boy coming over, studying, and he started working with me. And it was about the same time that I started to go to the gym. So I'm like, hey, come on, let's go together, right? And then obviously with all these things, they take it and they run with it. And now I'm
Yeah, of course.
43, he's in his 30s. He's benching way more than me. He's ripped AF. And I'm just an old man now, so
So did it become a bit of competition though for you guys, a little bit, or at least for them? Maybe not for you.
maybe. I think I can be competitive about anything. You know,
Yeah.
I can get competitive about, I don't know, parking a car. So yeah.
Yeah.
The gym is definitely another area where I can try and get one up on them, especially when I'm older than all of them, you know. Yeah, now that
Yeah.
I'm some of the guys in the kitchen, I mean, I'm 43 now, so I'm over 20 years older than some of the chefs in
Yeah.
my kitchen now. It wasn't always like that, obviously. And I still feel like I'm a young chef, evident that I am not. Um, but you know, I am an old man now in comparison. So when I can get one up on them in any type of scenario, then I'm gonna embrace it open-heartedly.
All right, enough with this old man stuff because I'm only a couple years behind you. So you gotta calm down a bit, Andrew. You gotta calm down on that. We're not that we're going to talk about working out the whole time, but I'm just curious because a lot of chef friends that I have, struggle. I think we all do with sort of balance in life. Like, was working out something that you did when you were younger? Is it something that sort of you brought into your life later in life?
I think that's a really good question. I think the gym for me was always like the 45 minutes of the day where it was like my time. Obviously nowadays I'm in the gym. I'm one of those really annoying people who's checking their email whilst in the gym and holding up all the equipment, and everyone's like
holding a dumbbell and your phone at the same time.
You know, when someone, like 10 people come up to you, go, "How many sets do you have left?" You know that you're doing something wrong. But to me, it's still like that separation of that is my time, and I always go early, first thing in the morning. So to me, once I've done that, I know the day has started. And as I said, I love scrolling on Instagram at the moment, and I must watch a lot of like motivational speaking because they keep on coming up on my reels. And there's this Navy SEALs guy who says, the most important thing, first thing you do when you wake up is make your bed, because you make your bed.
I've heard this.
Yeah, it means that you started your day, and when you come back again, you can understand truth that it's come full circle, and you've got a fresh bed that's beautifully made. But that marks the first thing you got your first job done. And the gym really for me is that first job done. And if I don't go, it's completely psychological. Like it just
mm,
lingers
mm,
over me. I feel like I haven't started the day correctly. And then when I go into the restaurant, I'll just feel like all my dumplings are rubbish and they're not pleated nicely. And then I'll
mm,
probably
mm.
take it out on some of the team saying that they're not doing stuff properly. So it is a massive psychological kind of benchmark in my day. But I think that started many years ago. I remember when I first started getting into exercise was really when I started doing martial arts. Actually, I tried loads of martial arts, and I actually settled on Wing Chun, which is obviously a Cantonese, Southern Chinese
Mm,
martial art. When I could have done, Muay Thai or boxing or whatnot, and I have gone to do them later on. But Wing Chun was about kind of connecting myself back with my culture because I remember my dad doing it growing up. And then you go into it and you look into the history of it, and then that connects you to language, and then from the
mm,
language that
mm,
connects you to the food that I'm dealing with every single day. And so the martial arts was, when I think of it, was always like an entry point into revisiting and reconnecting with my culture and my heritage.
mm,
And that's really when I started cooking, it was food and martial arts which really brought me together in refinding what being Chinese meant. And it sounds
mm,
a bit odd, and especially if some of your listeners are not ethnic minorities, it might seem like a very
mm,
strange thing to say, but we struggle all the time about where we lie in the whole diaspora. Like, how
mm,
Chinese are
mm,
we? How British are we? Um, and ultimately, the job that I do now, and the profession that I do now, it's constantly being played out. Right?
mm,
Guests are very quick to say, your food is not Chinese, or your food is fusion food, or your food is this." And actually, it's taken me what we've had the restaurant now for 11 years, and it's probably taken me the best part of that 11 years to be comfortable with where I
mm,
am, with where our cuisine sits, which is directly correlated to um, my approach and my viewpoint of where I sit within that British Chinese continuum.
Where have you landed in that? Like, how do you define yourself now that you've and I want to get to that exploration of China and when you went on this trip when you were younger, because I think that foundationally, I think that obviously gave you a lot more tools in your toolbox to really understand what it is to be British Chinese and all of that. But like, where have you landed in your comfortability around yourself?
It's going to sound really, really odd, and I have to always say this, that some of the rhetoric that we've been talking about for the 12 years that restaurant's been open has become very, very focused around speaking to people in the UK and people in Europe. So when I talk to your audience who are very new to what we do in the restaurant, they don't have that 12 years worth of baggage to carry
Mm,
with it. But it's going to sound weird, but nowadays when I do briefings with the team, the one thing I try to tell them is we are not a Chinese restaurant. We are our Chinese restaurant. We
mm,
are a restaurant which is A Wong. And because we're A Wong, it's ultimately a reflection of me as a person, as me and as a chef, which
mm, mm,
ultimately is intertwined with my Chinese cultural heritage. Um, where does that sit with regards to the trip that I took? I think the media sometimes make a big deal about the trip. I had an amazing time. I was
well, we want to hear about the fun parts.
yeah, it was all pretty much fun. And yeah, you have to. Yeah, I think you have to put it into its right place in time as well in the whole anthology of the whole thing. Because I'd gone to university and I studied chemistry at Oxford, and I got kicked out. But I remember the one thing that I always remember from there is I was very, very clear of this understanding. I said, wow, we worked so hard to get into this university, this college, and you expect everyone to be a genius. Like
Mm.
everyone, like you go to Harvard, everyone must be a genius, right? And then when you get there, you realize everyone's pretty much like you. Um, you know what I mean? Everyone's a
Yeah,
bit of
yeah,
an
yeah.
idiot.
Yeah, there's a few outliers.
Right? There's
There's
a
a
few
few outliers,
exactly.
but then everybody else is kind of
Right.
trying to figure it out.
If you remove Stephen Hawking from the equation
Yeah,
and a
yeah,
few of those characters,
exactly.
everyone else is a young 18-year-old with probably
Yeah.
one or two things really on their mind at that age, right? And studying isn't one of them. And then that was such an important lesson. And then I went into work into the restaurant, because when I got thrown out of university, my dad forced me to work in a family restaurant. And that's another really important part of kind of the story of A Wong, because my dad used to always come up to me, and he was to absolutely bitch me out because I'd been thrown out of university. I was the absolute disaster of the family, because he told all his friends that I was
Yeah, of
studying
course.
chemistry at Oxford, right? But the one lesson that really solidified with me is that he told me this idea that building connections with people is probably the most important skill that you can have in any job. And he never really wanted me to be a chef, right? Because back you're talking about the 2002, 2003, that kind of like apart from Gordon Ramsay and maybe like Wolfgang Puck, right? There weren't many really household names, and people were like, yeah, that's a real rock star, that. So he was like, you don't have to be a chef, and I don't want you to be a chef, and I don't want you to be a restaurateur. But what I do want you to be able to is to be able to spark a conversation with a complete stranger and not be shy and to hold your own. And I think that, together with the conclusion I'd come to from my time at Oxford, is like, yeah, there's no reason why I can't hold a conversation. We used to have loads of politicians who would come to the restaurant, chancellors of the exchequer, actual prime ministers that would come to the restaurant, or we'd deliver food to them. And I was just like, yeah, these people, they would just want to know about you. They're no different to us. And if you can share a little bit of what makes you you, that's something very unique that they won't know about. And so I had those two valuable lessons. And then when I went to China, as I said, I used to, I still love Fuchsia Dunlop's books. Do you know Fuchsia Dunlop?
No, I'm not familiar.
So she's a British or food cookbook writer who, at a very young age, went to Sichuan, backpack, no real idea what she wanted to do. Ended up in the Sichuanese Institute of Culinary Arts, did a course on Sichuanese cooking, absolutely got engrossed by the whole culture, the cuisine, all the nuances, learned the language, is completely fluent in the language, and now is probably one of the major authorities on kind of Sichuanese food in the English-speaking world. And so I looked it up that she'd gone to this culinary school. So, cool. Maybe I should do that. So I remember I somehow had some connections here and there, and somehow I bumped into someone who was teaching some kind of course. I think she was teaching French or something at this this culinary school, which had loads of subsidiary courses. And I contacted her. I said, hey, I'd really like to come and do a course there. She said, yeah, cool, come down. So I wrote my cousin into joining me, who lived in Chicago. He bailed on me last minute. So I was like, all right, cool. It's me, a suitcase, and let's see what happens. And then I landed in Chengdu. Didn't know anything. My Sichuanese is pretty much non-existent. And I got to the school, showed up on day one of the classes. Didn't really understand what was going on, but I only understood visually what was going on. The cutting, the description of the ingredients in terms of how he was smelling, how he was reacting. And again, this is the time of no iPhones as well, right? So it wasn't like you can go film everything and I can watch it back again. This is all in my head now. Some of it I might have romanticized over time, right? But what I remember is I felt completely lost, but at the same time, completely engrossed in the whole thing. And there was one time we were all making like mapo tofu, which is a very, very famous Sichuanese dish. It's a combination of fermented chili bean paste with tofu, with minced beef. And every student cooked it. And I just went about it. I'd worked a bit in a restaurant by that time. I'd done some culinary courses in the UK. And I remember a teacher pulling me out in front of the class and said, look, this is the top dog here. This guy has cooked a really beautiful mapo tofu, because I remember he said he's controlled the heat of the wok really, really well. I didn't know. It was all instinctive, right? I didn't I kind of knew that I wanted to make a delicious plate of food, and I'd watched them do the demo, and I just tried to replicate it. And it was then I thought, you know what, I understand that regional Chinese cookery is very, very specialized, and that there are like very particular nuances to every regional cuisine. But this isn't mission impossible. You can learn this, and it is possible. And so I did that, and then I loved the experience so much. I had so much fun there. Went out, hung out with some pandas, went for hot pot every night, like enjoyed the 90% humidity every day.
Yeah.
And again, that was I was in my early 20s.
Your skin was glowing.
Exactly.
Your skin was glowing.
Yeah, not now. Not now with my wrinkled complexion. And then after that, I remember I by that point, I was so happy with myself. I was like, you know what? We should do this again. So I rang up a friend who was a general manager of a hotel in Shandong, in Qingdao, where the beer's from. And he was like, yeah, come along, Andrew. So I was like, oh, cool. I've got this. In the UK, some people before they go to college, they take what they call a gap year, where you spend a year traveling around the world. And normally what that comprises of is actually you go to Southeast Asia, you get food poisoning so you can tell people that you've got food poisoning. Then you go to Australia, you get some braids. Then you talk about how you found yourself in Australia on Bondi Beach somewhere. And then you basically fly home with like a glowing tan at 19. And then you go to college, right? And I never did that properly. And so this was like, oh, this is my chance to do it. I've got my backpack, I can go and do it. So I flew to Shandong and Qingdao, went to this hotel. And again, it was work. I always feel like I sometimes under talk. I kind of underrepresent the whole experience because it was work. I showed up every day from like 7 a.m. until 11 at night. But because I was having so much fun, it never really felt like work. I was working with them. I was working with a dim sum team. Culturally, it was brilliant because working in mainland China is very, very different to working anywhere else in the world. I remember we were there, and I remember at the time, the big thing in that hotel was fake eggs. I'm like, what's a fake egg? It's like, yeah, the guy, the farmer will literally come to you with what looks like 1,000 eggs. They're perfectly egg looking with an eggshell and everything. When you crack them open, they're just water. I'm like, okay, this must be the only country in the world where it's cheaper to do that than to actually get a chicken to lay some eggs. But culturally, it was so different, and I really began to understood at that time the idea of regionality, because beforehand it was all just something you would say. You thought, China is such a massive country, 14 international borders, I think there's 6 maritime borders on top of that. Every cuisine is so different from one another. But it wasn't until I took that trip that I really started to understand what that meant. And I always tell people,
it's one thing to say those statistics, but then actually experience it, right, and the vastness of it. I mean, it's easier said than actually experienced, because it's like, whoa, there is so much here. But what I loved was, and it's funny you taking a crack at the media, or even like maybe your bio that goes, it was the first time he really connected with his heritage, and like that's all true. What I loved, what you and Mukta said about this, was you said it quickly became about spending time with people, which I think goes back foundationally to what your father taught you as well, about connecting with people.
100%. And I think the problem, I've got to say that there has been no time in my career, bar maybe 1 or 2 experiences, where someone has been reluctant to want to show me something. And that hasn't always been just because, I've bribed them with like some cigarettes, like some chefs, like give me some cigarettes and go, hey man, show me how to roast that pig, please. I beg you, your recipe's amazing. But more than that, it's really about seeing how people are so individual. Everyone has such different motives. Everyone has such different drives, which is the one thing I hate in modern day kitchens, is when chefs talk about one team, one dream. it really aggravates me. I've got no
Mm,
problem with people saying it. But what I love about our kitchen at A1 is that I openly tell people that you don't have to have the same dreams as I do. You don't have to have the same
mm,
motivations as I do. You may want to build a 7-story house in Uzbekistan. You might want to just have your child grow up and have the best education. You know, you might just want to have fun for a year working here, but learn something to take it. Whatever your motivation is, that's completely individual, and it's so wrong for someone in charge of the restaurant to say that we all need to have the same dream. It's
mm,
absolutely ridiculous. Because you want people to have that diversity. You want people to learn from one another. You know, one of the best things I ever learned was working in my father's restaurant. And you know, the chefs, they had their motivation. They were like gastronomes. You know, they were like from when I was a child, they were from Beijing, and they're like, we got to cook the best Chinese food ever, like in London. And they tried to do that.
mm.
And then there were some waiters who were, I remember at the time, a lot of them were from South America. They're from like Ecuador and places. They were not about pushing culinary boundaries at the time. It's like they were willing to work every hour under the sun to give their family a better life. And I remember they would tell me about
Correct.
their stories of back home and what it was, and talking about the, I don't know, the political instability of their countries and why they came here and what they hoped to achieve and what their wives were doing while they were working. And that, as a kid, is so inspiring when you hear
Mm,
firsthand um, of the drives of people. And as I said, you know, we can't all just sit there, you know, like this Instagram generation going, oh, it's great, you know, I just want to go and do a load of stages and put it on my CV and say I've ticked it off. You know, there's a reality to it. And sometimes when you hear people hand talking about their experiences and their troubles and their tribulations of how they got to where they are, that is sometimes even more inspiring than any char siu recipe or any noodle recipe that I can share. I can teach a young chef.
yeah, I think there's the very fortunate few that get to pick and choose what they want to do, and for most people, for majority of people, it's a job. They doesn't mean there isn't enjoyment in it. That doesn't mean there isn't community and they enjoy learning, but it's a job. They're trying to serve their family. They're trying to survive in a lot of ways, especially in listen, in food service, in hospitality. I mean, majority of the people in it, it's a job for them.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as I said, the times are changing and we're learning to adapt to the new generation, and we're questioning our own motivations and our own methods all the time. But ultimately, you know, it really is about embracing and celebrating all those individuals that we work with in order to try to build the best team that we can. You know, will it be
Mm,
perfect? I always tell people, every team meeting, we are so far from where we could be or where we need to be. But as
mhm.
long as we're moving forward, I don't mind.
Yeah. I love I listened to you talk about your journey a little bit and how in in a lot of regards and this resonated with me was you were sort of on the no plan. You know, it was like that's what I used to say about myself, Andrew. It's like there was the no plan, but I think you mentioned something that I kind of talk about a lot is there was a series of hundreds, thousands of small decisions that truly led to your success and ultimately kind of where you're at today. And you have to continue with those small decisions to keep moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is what you've described really is such an important lesson. I think so many people and so many times in my own career, I've tried to make grand plans. And now at 43, I've realized that just don't make grand plans. Just make small plans and get
Yeah,
to that small plan, and something else will happen, and something else will happen. You look, having saying that something will happen is wrong. You will meet someone who will
correct.
determine the next step. And I think to put what you said into perspective, absolutely true. You know, I went to China, and that was the first time I said, "Okay, we're going to open a restaurant. Natalie and I are going to open this restaurant." Why do you want to open a restaurant? Well, because in a weird kind of way, it was more so than anything because there'd been so many memories inside that building, right?
Mm.
So my parents had other restaurants, but I had no interest in doing anything with those restaurants. It was like, this was the building
Mm.
where we wanted to do it. I mean, as I said, if you come to the restaurant, we give everyone a menu with like a little
When?
when when
When I come.
when you come to the restaurant, on the one hand side of the restaurant, it's just a one paragraph little story about how we got to 2025. And one part of it says, what was the pastry kitchen? What is the pastry kitchen? Was the office that my sister and I were locked in. Now, I remember there was wine racks on one side, a photocopier machine on the other, and me and my sister were just like photocopying our asses while my parents were working because we were so bored. We were locked there from the hours of finishing school at 3 until like 10:30 at night. Now,
Mm.
and every celebration, every family event was always in the restaurant. Christmas
Mm.
Day, we would be washing glasses after my dad would take like 150 Japanese tourists who would want to eat Chinese food on Christmas Day. And then
Mm.
afterward, we'd go and drive to see my grandparents. So that building was what was special. And so we decided to open a restaurant. And I remember at the time, the restaurant that was completely in vogue was a restaurant which is international now, which was Hakazan. So
Mm.
that was leading the way. It was setting a benchmark for Chinese restaurants. And I had so much admiration for them because it was the first time where people genuinely within British society were talking about Chinese restaurants in a
Mm.
completely different way. They're like, yeah, that's sexy restaurant. Oh yeah, I went to this restaurant and I had Chinese food, ordered a bottle of Krug. The bill was immense, but it was like it was worth it. It was brilliant. The decor is amazing. The staff are so great, the service is so great, and that inspired me. I remember, but when I opened a restaurant, it was another step where I'd gone. I had so much admiration for this restaurant, but when we opened it, I was like, I want to do something different.
Mm.
And when we opened a restaurant, at the time, I remember I did a lot of research into New York City, where everyone started having counters everywhere. And in
Mm.
London, still not people counter dining still to this day in London. They make out that it's really probably it's not because British people hate sitting on a counter. The idea of being perched high up,
Why?
I
I
don't
love
know.
I love a counter. I love
Yeah,
a counter.
it's because you're cool. Like they're not called. Oh, excuse me, I would like to sit at the table, please. It's too high. It's too uncomfortable. I've got a back problem. And so London loves the idea of a counter, but when you're actually sitting on that counter, like everyone, majority of people don't like it. But I remember, like, I'd done a lot of research, and in New York, everyone was in the counter. Everything was open kitchen at the time, which for a Chinese restaurant is very unheard of, right? Very unheard of to have those two things.
Mhm.
And we were on a shoestring budget. We were, I'm pretty. We built the first restaurant with like $250,000 pounds. Nowadays
Wow.
you can't paint a restaurant
No.
with a lick of
No.
paint for that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and so we basically ran out of money, so we could only really renovate half the restaurant. But the other half of the restaurant was like a semi-storeroom for the first 6 months. All I said was I wanted the place to look really opposite to Hakkasan. Hakkasan was very dark and sexy. I wanted it to be
Yeah.
light and organic. The food in Hakkasan is very kind of deep and dark, and I wanted the food to be really light and kind of reflective of China as a whole, and not just be like Cantonese food. And that was the premise of the restaurant. That was it. Obviously, when we
Mm.
opened, all those great ideas in my head, when it turned into reality, it was an absolute disaster. I can't think of maybe one dish of the 60 which actually turned out the way it was painted in my head. So the first 6 months were horrific. I think I rewrote the menu probably 40 or 50 times in the first like
Mm.
3 months. But slowly, I think with all these things, you begin to find your stride, and you
Mm.
begin to find where your strengths and where your weaknesses are.
It sounds like Hakkasan, obviously for you, and I'm sure for many other people, was sort of this catalyst or this sort of pivotal moment where now guests in the UK are looking at Chinese food obviously in a different way. It's expensive. It was expensive, for the time. In regards to Chinese food, that obviously being a catalyst, like how has the London dining scene changed since like Hakkasan has come in? You like how have you seen it evolve? Because you've been in the space since you were a kid. Your family was was in the space.
Yeah, I mean, the London dining scene when it comes to Chinese food is very rich. I think that's the best way. I mean, the US is probably the only country where it's remotely comparable because it probably has a similar amount of history. So the earliest Chinese restaurant, you're talking about 1880, which again,
Mm,
it's probably near a little bit after kind of the US, the gold rush, the very
mm, mm,
early laundries set up by Chinese immigrants. And because of that history, London and the UK and the US have a very, very unique um, story to tell when it comes to Chinese food in comparison to any other country. So if you look at the Chinese food in France, for example, in Paris, that's really kind of more Vietnamese kind of nuance because there's
mhm,
more of a Vietnamese community who then gone to Paris and started to cook Chinese food. If you go into Holland in the Netherlands, for example, there's a big kind of Indonesian, a big kind of Suriname community. So
mhm,
that's taken its kind of spin onto what Chinese food has become. But really, like the US and the UK are really one of the only two places where you're literally talking about Chinese migrants going into those countries, admittedly not necessarily wanting to start restaurants as the first point of call, but then using a restaurant as a way to um, create economy for themselves. And I think because of that extra history, well, over 100 years now, the stories are so much more deeper and so much
mm.
more characterful than any other part of the world. So in 1880, the first kind of restaurants, then then you kind of get Chinese restaurant dotting around here or there. The very first Chinese restaurant in London was aptly called the Chinese restaurant. Um,
To the point.
yeah, to the point.
just
Let's not confuse people.
yeah, let's not confuse it.
And then really, the history seems to be there's this big history until like the 1970s. You go up to where you really get the first like superstar Chinese chef. So now you're talking about
Mm,
Mr. Poon. So Mr. Poon was the first ever Michelin-starred Chinese restaurant, pretty much. There was one before called Tiger Lily, but that chef's long gone. Mr.
mhm.
Poon is still alive. So he was.
Wow.
What I always say he's a brilliant man. His restaurant called Poon's, which was first in Chinatown, and then he moved it to Covent Garden. Open kitchen in the 70s. No one else dared to do it.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And he
Such an innovator at
he
the
he
time.
was such a don. He didn't just have an open counter like us. He put a glass box in the middle of the restaurant. So there's a 360 view of him losing his temper with people. And uh,
Incredible.
I met up with him during lockdown, and he would share all these stories with this humongous cigar. And I was like, you're a genius. Yeah, some of the stuff he comes up with. Yeah. And then
Amazing.
once you get to Mr. Poon, there almost is this void. Like my father and his friends who we grew up with, um, were all restaurateurs. They all had the same menu. They pretty much all just copied each other all the time. And that was pretty much reflective of London as a whole. They all had the same,
Mm.
I always say, the menus were like 90% the same. They pretty much all used the same wine supplier. So they all had the same wine list as well. Like exact vintages and exact labels. the, the same wine by the glass, same everything. And so there was this void really until Hakkasan, where Chinese restaurants were no
Mm.
longer family businesses. This was about creating a brand, And then before that,
Mm.
there was probably Wagamama, which obviously isn't Chinese, but it was started by a Chinese. Alan Yao was Chinese,
Mm.
and then Hakkasan really was that point where it's like we are gonna change the playing field for
Mm.
everyone. And when I look back at what we've achieved in the last 12 years, and I never ever claimed to be an incredible chef, right? But what I do hope that we might have had some input into is the way that people perceive Chinese food in 2025 from an international perspective. I'd like to think that we had something to do with some of those preconceptions that people had, and the way people have changed their preconceptions when they think of Chinese food. In a similar way to Hakkasan might have changed it in 2000, maybe in 2025, people might think, or some of the things that they think of being the norm when it comes to Chinese restaurant, some of those things were created by us. And some of those psychologies were originated within our tiny family restaurant in Victoria.
I've heard you say we're trying to make Chinese food pure. People forget about the skill, the history, the ritual, the artisanal elements of it. And you said, I want it to be what Japanese food is for so many people in the West. Explain that.
Yeah, I think that's that. Did I really say that? That's something very intelligent. I wouldn't say that normally.
You did. I might have helped it out a little bit, you know.
I think I know where that soundbite came from. I remember I was talking to a restaurateur who has loads of restaurants, and we were sitting down and we were having a drink, and he said, "Andrew, do you know what I think the difference between Chinese food and Japanese food is?" And he's talking about a time where Japanese food has a very different kind of aura about it compared to Chinese food. Still to this day, he said that Japanese food is about getting the best ingredients and doing the least to it, and Chinese food is about getting the worst ingredients and doing the most to it. And I was like, that's really disrespectful. And then I started to think about it. I was like, the guy's not a chef, so let's just take it back one step further. And it's doing as much to it as possible to make it as delicious as possible. And when he's talking about the worst ingredients, he's not talking about like picking off the weed off the floor. He's just talking about, not necessarily using a prime cut of beef, right? Or not necessarily having, the not everyone could be cooking grouper every day, right? Sometimes you're going to have to cook a bit of farm sea bass, so that's the reality of a nation, right? And when I started to look more deeper into it, like, it's about technique. It's not about doing as much work as possible to make something inedible edible. It's about using as much technique as possible in order to create as much magic as possible. And over the last 12 years, I've done this so many times. I go in like a cocky chef and I'm like, I can improve that recipe. I've got all this knowledge. I've got 1,000 cookbooks downstairs. Like, I'm pretty sure if I take that bit and that bit and that bit, I put it all together, I can make a Peking duck. Is an example. I can make Peking duck even better, right? And then I start, and then the process starts. And then about 18 months later, I come back to a recipe, and it's pretty much the most old school recipe you can find, like dating back maybe 1,000 years. And it goes to show, like, some of these recipes are so highly evolved. If you tweaked one thing every year, Chinese gastronomy's recipes are going to be pretty foolproof, because you're talking about 3,000 tweaks to a recipe, right? And then you start talking about, you go on to another thing like dough, or you go to about bread, or you're talking about starches, or you talk about cooking with a wok, or even if you talk about the idea of cooking in a wok inside a water reservoir, which no other cuisine still does, which I do not understand why no one else does it. It means that you can wash one pan you can use for the whole of service, as a launching 50 pounds at the kitchen porter every night in order to get through service. Like, everything about a Chinese kitchen is so technical, and it's been so meticulously thought out over such a long period of time, that some of these recipes, the magic is so uncelebrated that a lot of what we do in a restaurant is about trying to narrate that story back to the guest. In Japanese cuisine, everyone's all about, you get the fish, you stick the needle into it, the himijibi, and you salt it, and you prevent the rigor mortis, and then you get firmness in the fish. And everyone's like, oh, everyone wants firmness in the fish. So every chef from the whole of Europe starts doing it, and everyone wants firm fish. And then you go to China, like there's a fish swimming in a tank. And when you place the order, they get the fish out of the tank and they cut it straight away. And they do very little to it, like besides some fish butcheries. And then they stick it in a steamer. And the texture is completely different. And I talked to the chef. I'm like, chef, like, why? Like, this is the complete opposite of salting it, leaving it for 24 hours for it to firm up to be tense. And he said the best. You remember this was Chef Tam, who's an incredible chef in Macau. I think his new restaurant's called Five Moons or something. Amazing restaurant. And he was like, Andrew, like in Cantonese food, what we want is we want lightness. So when you get a fish and you take it out of the tank and it's live and you steam it straight away, it literally rigor mortis is still happening and you're cooking it at the same time. So basically the whole thing is souffleing up, like literally like a souffle, like a fish souffle, like real time souffle. So when you eat it, that texture of the fish is so light, which is what Cantonese food is famous for. It's about that lightness. And you don't hit it with a heavy sauce. You hit it with a little bit of a soy that's got a little bit of sugar in, which has been seasoned together, a little bit of ginger and spring onion into that soy sauce, a little bit of black sesame oil, everything very, very kind of, again, that word's pure, that very kind of not doing too much to it, but still umami and still delicious. I think these are the kind of techniques that I was so fascinated by them when I learned about them. I just like, if I can share just like half the stories with my guests that I've been so lucky to learn, they're going to love it. They're going to go home. They're going to start Googling. They just Google one thing that they learned from the experience with us over the 4 hours. I'll be more than happy. That's our job done. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be a dish. It could be something about culture. It could be something about the fact that we like to put one dish on, which is about kind of Western culture, which is the Islamic kind of community of part of China, which is a very different kind of gastronomy. Now, I always say that you relate it back to, we talk about the climate in Hainan, which is known as the Hawaii of China. You know, just these little things that people just don't know about, because China has been a very open country, but still, if you compare it to Japan and you compare it to some other parts of Southeast Asia, people still have this kind of preconception or this misconception that it's still a very closed, a lot of secrets, you can't, and they will never tell you. Well, no, actually, gastronomy is not like that. And I think if I can use gastronomy to try to open up some of these discussions, then I think everyone will hopefully love Chinese food as much as I do.
Well, if your father was still around, what would he say about you, your wife, and all that the team has accomplished?
I always say this. I think if my father was alive, I would never become a chef. That's the prime thing. He'd be like, yeah, I am not spending that much money on your education for you to become a cook. You go do something else. But I think if we've blanked out maybe the first 15 years of training and just got to the part where the restaurant started to pick up accolades and get some kudos, I think what he would have done is that he would have, I think he would have helped me a lot with the journey, because he loved to read. He loved to read and he loved to travel and he loved to eat. You know, and actually I would say that those three attributes are probably more important than learning how to fillet a fish, you know, or how to use a wok. You know, that idea of curiosity, that idea of constantly having this eagerness to learn more and explore more, and then to travel and to eat. Like, he would be like, hey, check this out, check this out, check this out, check this out. I went here. I would probably be the one working my ass off. He'd be traveling around, sending me WhatsApp photos. Andrew, see if you can make something like this.
See if you could do this. Yeah. We need to incorporate this into the menu.
Yeah. I'm at the Rosewood somewhere. Like, they've got this really cool chef. Yeah. Come and try and cook one of his dishes here. I imagine it would have been like that. And then, and he loved restaurants. He was very kind of business oriented, but he loved hospitality, and he loved the idea of having restaurants, of eating in restaurants, and a connectivity that you create from having a little restaurant. He used to know everyone. He used to come in, we'd sit, and I never do it what he does, but he used to come in, he'd start having wine with some of the guests, they'll spark up cigars together, and then all of a sudden, like, he's found a lawyer, he's found an accountant, he's found a casino buddy, all this and the other. And it's very different to the way that I run the business
Amazing.
now. But it was because it was in his blood. He just loved this
Mm.
idea of togetherness, which is what a restaurant really is about. It's about that togetherness.
Layering on to your father and your family and this like developing and nurturing of connection. I've heard you talk about sort of like the success, not just being the food. Obviously, at your level, you know how to cook. Okay, you know you know how to cook, but I think there's this like the Wong family hospitality. Like what defines the Wong family hospitality?
I think that's a great question. And like, again, I'm going to end up talking way too much. But the first time I really understood the magic of Wong hospitality is when we opened a restaurant with a third party investor, and they came out with all these scenarios, all these spreadsheets, all these kind of SOPs and blah, 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 all these jargons and this and the other. And the restaurant ultimately didn't succeed because the stuff that I'd learned from my parents, I thought would be inferior to these spreadsheets and these official SOPs and these standard, these standards which they claim to be, they're like foolproof, that, yeah, this, that, the other, don't worry, this guy, he's worked at this 50-star hotel and run a team of 50,000 people. He'll be able to run this one. And my dad was always like, yeah, get a CV, throw it in the bin. Like, just tell him to come in. Let's have a chat. Let's see if he's a nice person. And let's see if we get along. And that will be the recruitment process, right? And I for that entire time that we opened that other restaurant, as much as I learned from the spreadsheets and the SOPs and the fact that you do need to have some organization to your family-run business, and you can't just do it, by the edges of your pants all the time. You have to have some kind of official procedure. The actual art of hospitality, the things that my parents taught me growing up, like, don't waste money, look after the team, just try to cook nice food. Like, every restaurant complains about staff food, and I'm sure our staff complain about our staff food too, but at least we're not actively trying to make it crap. Like, if you go to some European restaurant, I used to hear these horrible stories, like, literally next thing, it's like basically picking the food out of the bin and just putting it into staff food. Whereas in Chinese restaurants, it really is like, you try to cook nice food. You try to cook nice food, right? When the staff are with you as a member of the team, they're like your family. So you have to look after them, whether it be a trouble at home or it be trouble with a relationship or trouble with their kids. You have to take an active interest in that, more so than them just being kind of black and white. And my parents had a lot of these things which they had innately. They did learn over time. My parents were like one of the first people to own a pub, Chinese people to own a pub in the UK.
Wow.
So they were very much kind of learning to deal with this, learning how to deal with shall we say, sticky situations. When they had pubs in really rough parts of London, how do you diffuse a situation? These kind of things which I always just took for granted. I never thought they would be important, but when that restaurant failed, I was like, if I'd taken that lesson from my mum that time, or if I'd listened to my dad and brought that back, and not just thought, what, these big official people know best. And if I didn't do that, and I'd listened to my own gut instinct or things that I'd learned, then that restaurant wouldn't have closed down.
Yeah. No, I love that. I was just curious because so much of, I think, your success is attributed to what your father taught you, what you learned, whether you realized you were learning it or not,
Right.
as a child, being in the restaurant and seeing how they dealt with people, because it is, we've talked so much on this show, like, this is a people business,
Right.
like through and through, not only internally and externally. There's your guests, but then you also have your people, your family, the restaurant, the restaurant family. Being as we're young still, okay? we're not old yet. What have you not accomplished that is kind of high on your goals list?
you know what? I think ultimately, and I always say this to our publicist, that, I see all these chefs, like they're chasing things all the time. Like, oh, I wanna win 3 Michelin stars, or I wanna be on a world's 50 best list. I wanna be this, I wanna be number whatever it is, whatever. I always say, like, if it all ended tomorrow, I would be so happy and I would be so at peace, because as a restaurant and everything I ever wanted to achieve, I've way surpassed those expectations, those goals that I'd set myself before I started this journey. Now, I started this journey being a dropout from university, and I went in because my father passed away, and I thought, oh, let's help my mum out. And then I went to help my mum out, and I thought, oh, well, so I'm going to spend time in this building anyway. Maybe I should learn how the back end works. So I went into the kitchen and learned a bit. And then I went on a little trip, met some cool people, opened a restaurant, fumbled along. When we first won our first Michelin star, the entire kitchen, so there were, I think there were 11 chefs at the time when we won our first Michelin star. Every single that won or those 11 chefs had started with me as a kitchen porter. So there was never
Wow.
a qualified chef ever in the building. And obviously after that, then we changed things around a little bit. So when you ask them what is left to achieve, like, of course there are always goals. There are goals. I'd love to travel more, so open restaurants in other countries to try to connect with other countries of how Chinese food is transpired through their local cuisine. But when you talk about the real heart of what your question's really about, nothing.
It's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place to be in. All right. So when I'm in London, and let's say we have 3 or 4 hours together, where are we going? Where are we going to eat? What neighborhood are you taking me to?
All right. So I think first of all, we go for a coffee first. Right. So we go for coffee. We go round the corner from the restaurant. We go around the corner of the restaurant for a little cheeky espresso at Benvenuti. Again, I just love that place because it's two guys just put their money together, open this amazing little coffee shop. They're there. I'm pretty sure they play up the whole Italian vibe. But I love it. Even the music is so,
as they should. As they should.
Just, I'm all about the Disney aspect. Sometimes I'll buy into it all. have a really nice toasted panini. After that, we'll go for dim sum. If you're not coming to the restaurant, then I would probably take you to Chinatown, because I think Chinatown is an important place to go to. It's changed so much, but it's an important part to go to because it's now in Soho, in the heart of the city center. And I would take you to a very old family friend's restaurant who used to be a dim sum chef and now is a restaurateur. Very kind of old school dim sum, very kind of similar to what it would be in Hong Kong. Go there, have a chat, crazy atmosphere. Yeah, and we'll probably go for, I don't know, have a cheeky bubble tea just for the sake of it, just because we need to do something on the way to the, maybe we'll go to the Wolseley first. We'll go to the Wolseley to, just to connect you with some Britishness, I think. Connect you with some Britishness.
Be rude not to.
It would be rude not to.
Well,
right?
I'm there.
Exactly. And then as we go there, after that, you're going to get to dinner time. I will take you to East London. We go to a Pakistani restaurant. Go to a Pakistani restaurant called Lahore, where it's bring your own alcohol. It's always a good thing.
Love that.
And
Love
then
that.
their barbecued lamb chops, the tandoori lamb chops. Oh, and their shish kebab, and then the bread's amazing. After that, if you're still hungry after that, probably go for some Sri Lankan food. Maybe go to Hoppers in Soho or behind Selfridges. And if you're still hungry after that, I don't know. Opposite Hoppers, there's that Japanese brand, which I don't know what they're called now. Are they called Ichiban or something? Where it's basically rice with the egg on top and like curry.
I know what you're talking about.
I love that type of food. I really love that type of food. And then late night, because it's London, you have to end it at the 24-hour bagel shop, which is where all the taxi drivers go for their snack at 3 a.m. on where's the street where all the curry houses are? I can't remember. In East London.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. I think I'm going to get my ticket now.
Let's do it.
and then I'll start the fast right now in preparation for that day. Andrew, what's a life lesson you can leave us with?
Don't make grand plans. Don't make grand plans. And the other one which my dad taught me, like the ability to connect with people way surpasses any qualification that you can achieve in life.
Love it. I love it. Thank you so much for being a part of our community. I cannot wait, and I'm sure our listeners cannot wait to have a similar day that we're going to have and also experience A Wong as well. It'll be a real pleasure.
We'll bring a whole band along.
We'll get everybody. It's a buyout. It's a buyout.